Are we already recording? Okay. Okay. I appreciate everybody that's here on the webinar today. Looks like we've got throughout the area quite a few people. So um, those of you who have had experience with E-rate know, as Ben just alluded to, sometimes it's not the smoothest thing in the world, but the great thing is it gives us it's access to a lot of money for our system, over $1.5 million. And that's just for the category 2. The category 1, we get quite a bit out of that just for access to the internet for our communications. So um, I'm hoping that category 2 is something that we can pick up a little bit more this year. We've got the tech services team has got some recommendations that we'll talk about, or that I'll send out to you before the date that Ben gives us. And um, I hope that Ben will make this as clear as mud, or clearer. So, Ben, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and you can go ahead and carry it away. Wait, before we get started, it's just okay. I just wanted to check the chats, so nothing, just the audio check, so we're good to go.
Yeah, my name is Ben Mock. I work with E-Rate Solutions, and I file the annual E-Rate applications to get funding for schools and libraries. It's primarily a reimbursement program for internet access, but over the last few years, they have branched away from telecom phone-related stuff, which is completely over, and a focus now on Category 2 equipment, which is roughly saying anything to help push the internet or spread the internet at a school or library, to help push to both patrons and staff to make sure everybody has valid and acceptable internet access, which is a growing need, as I've noticed, and has been increasing by the years as far as the minimums and the averages. But most schools and libraries in the state of Kansas fall between the 60 and 80% reimbursement range. A lot of southeastern Kansas falls into the 70-80 degree range, which is, it's based upon the every library has a regional school district, and the numbers are based on the free and reduced lunch percentages. And it can fluctuate, usually about 10% per year, but it usually stays in the 70-80% range most years. And we very rarely see much in the way of change, but it can drop or raise 10% on occasion. As far as the annual process goes, recently for Cat 2, they've made some changes where basic funding requests, if you can just get pricing for equipment needs, this is access points, switches, limited firewall, routers, and even cabling and things to help push, and battery backups for anything that's eligible, such as those switches and access points, can be eligible and reimbursed by USAC. And if the total sum falls, the bid pricing that you receive falls under $3,600, we can skip the actual bid process, which is required for all other aspects of E-Rate. And as far as the standard process goes, each year in behalf of my libraries and schools, I file a 470, usually starting late December and all throughout January and February. And the Form 470 is a bid request where we put your service needs up for bid, and local area providers are allowed to submit their proposals, basically. And we accept all different proposals for the various needs, be it internet access or the Cat 2 equipment, if you don't already have bid pricing under $3,600. And we take these bids, and then we do after 28 days, which is the mandatory bid period, after we post our 470, we do a quick bid assessment. If you get more than one bid, anything with 2 bids or more, we have to do a bid evaluation, which I generally write up or help write up for all of my schools and libraries, which is basically just a weighted evaluation form where pricing has to be the highest weighted factor and everything else can be used to counterbalance. So if you have a service provider that just doesn't work well in your area or doesn't have the same compatibility, or you're just not comfortable with that provider, we can weed out various bids through the evaluation process using other needs against the highest price factor. And basically after that, we can make our selections. And the primary need I have for the filing the 470 each year is information as to what your specific needs are for internet access and or equipment. And most recently, they've added portable internet access, such as MiFi's and Wi-Fi's, depending on what terminology you prefer to use or the providers prefer to use. And this is going to be the first year for the MiFi's and Wi-Fi's to be added. So this is going to be kind of a test year for that. But that comes with certain requirements as well. But for just to cover the MiFi's and Wi-Fi's real quick, they have cap limits on this. So normally it's a funding percentage, but they have a limit for $15 per month per line for MiFi. And for the devices, it's a cap of 90%. So if you already have active MiFi's and Wi-Fi's that are loaned out by the library, we can apply $15 per month to each line of service. And if you're getting new devices to loan out, we can apply $90 in credits to that as well. But again, we have to go through the 470 process that I was discussing, which is, of course, to put it up for bid, which would be the number of lines or the number of devices for MiFi's that you need, or the internet access, or of course the Cat 2 equipment. And then I would collect the bids on my end just to make sure I have them all recorded. So they usually come to me. If you get bids on your end, please send them to me so we have a record of them, because USAC is very, very strict on record keeping, especially with our bid processing, which is a big part of the process. I take all the bids, and of course we evaluate, and I need information again regarding what your needs would be so I can file the 470. And then once we have bids available, I will send all of the bids to the library director or the tech contact or everybody who is involved. And then I will ask for information from your end as to what bid you wish to go with. Then we can help write up our evaluation and base either solely on the lowest price available or the preferred service, and we can weigh it out with the evaluation. And then this is a key step. We have to get signatures and dates on the winning bid, which needs a signed signature and the date that it's selected. And it can be the same day or prior. We need the bid evaluation signed a day. That's to show that we did due process to USAC. So they see that we did our evaluation if we have more than two bids or more than one bid, two or more. And that we have made a selection, which is going to be signed and dated. And then the winning bid itself, which is usually just a sheet of paper with the pricing or whatever. Sometimes it is an official contract. Sometimes it's just a bid agreement, as we call them. But it will need a signature and a date as well. As long as it's any library personnel, they're allowed to sign and date it just to show that the selection has been made and done in window. Because a big trick with E-rate and USAC is everything has a window when it needs to be filed and deadlines that follow that. And as long as we're ahead of the deadlines, and everything is done in process, which I keep proof of just to make sure that when we have reviews and audits that we can back up all of our claims. We did everything exactly as they require. Which we've never had any issues with, thankfully. And again, knock on wood. But we take this information and we save it, and then we make our bid selection. And once we have our bid selection, I can file the 471, which is requesting the actual funding based on our winning bid. It's basically our technically funding request at that point. And I can do it with the signed bid, or for multi-year agreements, we can get a contract and I can sign with that as well. And I upload those to your Form 471. So USAC has a record of what agreement we made, whether it be the bid or the official contract. And with the contracts, it can be 2 years, it can be 3 years, it can be 5, up to 10 years is the minimum. Most internet access or services don't need to be 10 years, because that's sometimes the pricing goes down a little bit if we have some more competition. Rarely does it go up, but it has happened. And we can do a 3, 5 year or a single year, which they call it month to month, but we still need some signed price sheet to show that we're doing a 1-year agreement, because USAC requires, even if you're continuing with the service provider and we get no bids, we usually have to solicit some form of pricing, whether it be something directly from the provider or just even something off a website necessarily. If it shows the pricing and the service level and we sign and date it, we can show that to USAC, and it shows that we've got something signed and dating showing this is the product we're going with, or this is the service we're going with, and that we're going to use it for the next 12 months. But again, anytime you have a multi-year agreement for your internet service, it does allow, and if it's done in process with our 470 application in the bid window, that contract will act as our 470 for the following funding years that are covered by that contract. So if we sign a 3-year deal, the next 2 years, we don't have to do the bid process. We can actually skip that and file just the 471, because we'll have the record of our bid process from the year we assigned the contract. And as long as it covers the funding year, we can still apply it, no problem. We skip the And the bid process is usually the most technical and the most time-consuming process. So a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract kind of streamlines things. We also like to word in all of my RFPs that I attach with my 470s, and the RFP is just basically a request for proposal. And I can include wording on there that eliminates spam bids, because we always get some just random service provider that might not even exist in our area that just going to throw down some kind of offer to every single post that's on the USAC site. And it also contains wording that I do allow for, or we do often allow for, increases under said contract. So if your access isn't high enough, but you want to stay with the provider and you have an agreement, and it says on the agreement that you're allowed to increase your service, we can increase the service. And if you do it in the middle of the funding year, we can't add additional funding till the next cycle comes up. But when I file that next 471, I can include the additional pricing and update the service level. And we can continue under that same contract, but you still get the more money for the higher service. Or if even if the service level goes up, but the pricing stays the same, which again has happened, which is a very good scenario for libraries on a budget, when your service goes up and your price remains the same, which is excellent. You can't count on those kind of things, but every once in a while it does happen. But again, once we have the bid squared away and we have our agreement for the Cat 1 service, or in the case of Cat 2, we just compile the bids and we do a bid evaluation and we select our winning provider. And again, with the Cat 2, if it's over 3,600, we need a signed and dated bid. And if it's under 3,600, we just need the bid and not the bid evaluation, because you don't need we don't actually do the 470 process. If it's under 3,600, we can just sign the bid sheet itself, and I can upload that to the 471 and shows USAC that our pricing is under 3,600. We don't need to prove that we did a bid process at that point. And if you're worried about getting multiple bids, we can go ahead and file the 470 and collect bids just to see what kind of pricing we do get, because sometimes it's hard to guesstimate or know beforehand if your bids or your average price or your bid from your provider is going to be less than 3,600. Well, we can go ahead and get the bids that way and then go ahead and make a selection. And in such cases, it probably doesn't hurt to go ahead and do an evaluation just in case, even though we're not required to in that instance with under 3,600. But again, if it's above that, we definitely need the bid evaluation signed and dated, as well as the winning bid, and then we can file with that information. And just to clarify, Cat 2, a normal E-rate funding cycle begins on July 1st of a given year. So the current funding year is FY24, which will actually end on June 30th of 2025. And then FY25, the next funding year, technically start on July 1st of 2025 and run through June 30th of 2026. For Cat 2, they give us a little bit larger window because of the equipment sometimes needs configuration, installation, various other components that factor into getting it set up. And plus the needs sometimes are more immediate. So for Cat 2, once you have a signed bid and funding approval through the 471, you can actually go ahead and purchase the Cat 2 equipment as early as April 1st for like the next cycle, FY25. As of April 1st, 2025, you will be able to purchase in a window and be able to get the funding applied. Now, they won't let us refund it until July 1st because of a technical issue at USAC, which has their dates, doesn't allow their system to process any refund before that July 1st date. So even though you're technically valid to purchase from April 1st to July, their system really can't handle doing a reimbursement prior to that. We're not exactly sure why, but they've never fixed it. So you can purchase as early as April 1st, and the window stays open an additional 3 months at the end of the funding year too. So if your equipment needs are postponed, you would actually have till September 30th of 2026 to make the Cat 2 purchase and still be what they call in window, which means eligible for reimbursement. So for any Cat 2 equipment, whether it be the under or over $3,600, you are eligible to purchase the equipment and have your bill date April 1st or beyond, all the way till September 30th of 2026. And again, the larger window, part of it was a COVID issue with supply and demand, because sometimes it was hard to get equipment when everything was shut down there. So it helped with the longer window. But again, that's only for the Cat 2 equipment. The Cat 1 services, like I said, if you change providers or if you're waiting for the new service level or you've changed under contract, the new funding cannot be applied till July 1st of the coming funding year once it's been updated or recorded. Every once in a while, I have a library that's in a situation where they need to change internet service providers early. either the service is poor or there's a new provider that's charging a lot less for better service or a higher service level. You can switch early, but you will negate whatever remaining funding you have for that current provider, which if the price is a lot less, you might be saving money either way. And we can't apply new funding until the next funding cycle. So if you ended your service on December 30th, you wouldn't be able to apply the rest of that year's funding until at all, or the new funding until the June or July 1st date of the following year. Which again, if you're saving money either way, and I've had library directors tell me like, this is cheaper, it's a better service, we'll go ahead and negate the last few months of our prior funding year and would like to apply for this in the next funding cycle. Totally acceptable. Again, it's based on your budget, or sometimes just the internet access needs if the provider's being exceptionally poor, not providing a quality service or the needed service, which the internet access seems to be a huge need at libraries, because a lot of local communities rely heavily upon their local libraries for internet access and to do any of their business online, because not everybody has Wi-Fi at home or access to a place with free or low-cost Wi-Fi, and therefore this is a important resource for a lot of communities I've seen over the years. So, let's see what else. As far as what we do from E-Rate Solutions, our biggest need from our libraries, again, is the information to file our requests every year, signatures and dates on both bid evaluations and winning bids, and also contracts if a contract is created from the winning bid. And after that, the only annual need is invoicing. And E-Rate and USAC is an invoice-driven program, and they require us to keep all E-Rate applicable invoices or applied invoices for a full 10 years, which I keep records of. Most of my spreadsheets and my files are full of tons and tons of invoices going a full 10 years back for any of my clients. And even if we discontinue working, we still save the invoices in case there's, and that's the review limit. And very rarely do we get a review that goes back even a couple of years. But on extreme cases, and very rarely do we have audits, again, that information becomes pertinent. And audits, again, are extremely rare, but it's a major part of the process. So when you do have one, it's good to have all of your receipts, as it were, and your invoices. Therefore, you can show that we went through all the processes as far as our annual 470 cycle and our bid selections and our evaluations. And we kept all of our invoices on file that proved this is the service we had, this is the service level. And in some cases in reviews, they also like to see the check numbers for the paid invoice. And again, that's usually with the end of the year reimbursement, which is another thing I should probably go ahead and cover right quick. Is there are two types of refund from the E-Rate program, which is the SPI, which we call SPI invoicing, which some providers can't provide. They're all supposed to, but some of them can't provide, but most of them generally can provide the monthly on-bill credits. And occasionally there's some hiccups with this because sometimes the monthly credits get delayed the first couple of months, or the provider forgets to apply them, or they have a hiccup. And in such cases, they will apply the missing credits or the skipped months. They're required to in any case. Sometimes you have to argue with them a little bit, but they will apply any skipped months of credits. And the other option, which a lot of applicants use, is the BEAR method, which is the end of the funding year. We take all of the invoices. I include them in my spreadsheet to track all of the monthly fees and put all the dates in. And then I apply for the BEAR application with all 12 invoices. And then you get a lump sum direct deposit, which is handy for a nice boost to the budget at the end of the year, or some do it for record keeping purposes. And again, some providers just can't apply the SPI monthly credits, and therefore the BEAR guarantees you get whatever's possible available. And I take care of all the paperwork on my end, which is seems like it would be more complicated, but it kind of simplifies things in some ways. However, the BEAR direct deposit does now require, they used to cut actual paper checks and would mail them to us, and would mail them to our schools and libraries. Now it's become a completely digitized system, and a 498 is required. And it's the only standard form in the process, and it's a one-time form. So if your banking stays the same, you only have to file this one time. But it is a direct deposit application that consultants completely cannot touch in any way, shape, or form, because it will contain your bank information, your routing number, things like that for your direct deposit. And it's the one form in the system that I'm not allowed to have user permissions for. I'm not allowed to have access to. It needs to remain with library personnel for logical security reasons. So not everybody has your account number and all your banking information, of course. And that is something that library directors themselves would have to file on the EPC website, which is something I'll cover here in a minute as well. And it's one of the few forms that I apologize that I cannot file for any of my library applicants. And again, once it's set up and it's set up in the system, you shouldn't have to ever change it or update it unless the library changes banks or accounts, of course. So once the 498 is established, I can file bears for Cat 1, Cat 2, any application without any issue or pause. And let's see, the other big thing with the current setup would be the EPC sites. So if you're already set up for E-Rate and you have an EPC account, I can do some updates from my end with my consultant linked to any active entity that's already linked to me as a consultant. I can update your addresses, your numbers, your email accounts, that kind of thing. But I cannot update the library account administrators. That's something, again, that must be done from the library end. I do have quite a bit of compiled information to assist with that. The USAC helpline, they used to have a standard form that I still believe applies. You can also call in and give them some of the information now from the library or the entity itself. It used to be, it just had to be on some kind of paperwork from the library itself, usually with the library letterhead, and then you'd have to give the current administrator some of their information. If pertinent, a reason why the other administrator is no longer with the system, and we would mail that in or attach it to a customer service case on my end once I received it, and we could update the administrator. Now they're letting a lot of libraries and schools do it over the phone. As long as they're called from the entity itself, they will update the administrator directly over the phone, which is much more streamlined and easy to do. But again, I can send information to help with that. If you're new to E-Rate and you want to apply and you don't have an active EPC account or don't have access to your EPC account. And once you have an active EPC account, I will also send information to link me as a consultant. And the moment I'm linked as a consultant, I have full access to your account and can file all of your annual forms and take over the whole process from there. But again, I can't update the administrator or give the user permissions and add the consultants. And the library admin will have full user permissions and the consultant will have full user permissions with the exception of that form I mentioned earlier, the direct deposit 498. Everything else I can have access to and file for you, which is pretty useful as far as being fairly hands-free as far as the library side of the needs. Let's see, I'm not sure if I'm leaving anything out at the moment. I know we wanted to discuss Cat 2 a bit more.
Is anyone else able to hear?
He left us.
Okay, so he went away. We'll let him get back on. While he's logging back on, just want to let you know, I believe, Teresa, I believe Moran has not used E-Rate for a while, right?
No, we have not.
Okay. When he gets back on, we'll definitely make sure that if you could ask him and let him know if there's anything else that you've got to do. I think I gave you an email introducing him to you, and you might show your face so he knows how happy you are to do E-Rate, and he'll help you so much. Okay. And I'm trying to, is there anybody else that I see? Andrew, you had a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just gonna say, he's not on here, so he won't hear my compliment, but if you haven't worked with him before, he's awesome. And you know, whatever it costs us, I've always said, if my board ever says we're not paying him to do that, we want you to fill out the paperwork, I would personally pay him out of my pocket because I don't ever have to do any of this stuff. And then, so it's very, I mean, every once in a while he asks you for something, otherwise it's hands off. And so it works out really well. I do have a question for him when he
Okay.
comes back, so that's all.
If you, Andrew, if you want to just go ahead and put that question in the chat. I put a couple questions as he was going through it. So we'll just have anyone else that has any questions. Looks like he's back on here. So we'll have you ask the question right now then. Okay, Ben, are you back on?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We were wondering if we were that bad.
I was in mid-speech there and I realized the screen looked like it was frozen. I couldn't get a response and all of a sudden the whole thing closed out on me. So my
Hey,
apology.
I won't tell you who said it, but one person gave you a big compliment saying that she would even pay out of pocket if her board ever said that she couldn't work with you. So we won't say who that is. It might make you go to our recording and you can see who it was. But Andrea had a question for you.
Okay.
My question was, and maybe you're gonna refer to this later, but when I was listening to your category 2 stuff and talking about like the MiFis and the Wi-Fis, and how is that different than like the ECF that we get now? Or
That's a very good question. It's actually based upon the results of the ECF, which the ECF is supposed to be a temporary program. They've kind of extended it because the need was greater than they realized. And the reason E-Rate has now decided to include the MiFis and the MiFi devices for remote Wi-Fi is absolutely because of the ECF needs and the productivity they had from that exact mini program or sister program that they had there for a little while, which is still continuing. They keep claiming it's going to end, but they keep extending it because the need has been great and there's still applicants waiting for funding. So, but no, that's a very, very good question.
so is there like double dipping on that right now then? I mean, can you get ECF funds on one hand and category 2 funds on the other, or how's that work?
That is also a good question. You're not allowed to let them overlap. If you're currently getting the ECF funding, you have to wait till the ECF funding expires, which should be any time now, literally, because they've claimed it was going to close on 3 different occasions now. But yeah, you can't overlap funding. And if you're getting some other type of funding for your MiFis or Wi-Fis, again, they don't want you to apply for the E-Rate. But if you're paying the whole bill or going to be when the ECF cuts off, then you can switch over to the E-Rate funding, which should be a long-term, more permanent solution. Because again, the ECF is supposed to be a temporary thing that should be closing soon. We're going to see how that actually goes.
Getting ECF funding right now for that. Do we go ahead and reapply then for that, or do we?
Yes.
For the ECF funds to get
No,
through 2025 probably, or?
Yeah, go ahead and apply for the E-Rate because, like I said, the ECF will be coming to a close, and the E-Rate is going to be the more permanent solution to that.
So just skip the ECF funding is what you're saying then?
Yeah, they're not letting us apply for additional
Okay.
ECF funding at the moment, so
Okay.
that is going to come to an end. So the only way to apply for continued funding or ongoing funding would be through the E-Rate. But very good questions, by the way.
Thank you.
We keep her around for that.
Good idea.
And Ben, before you go to the next or your next topic, which you said you were going to do a little bit more on category 2,
Yes.
I had a couple questions that I put in the chat. Did you say 90% or $90 on the what you were talking? I think that
On
was
the
on
devices.
Wi-Fi. Yeah. So was
Yeah,
that 90?
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's right. Was it 90% or dollars?
It's $90. Yeah.
Okay.
They have caps on the MiFi and Wi-Fi equipment and services. They decided to set a set limit to try to have a more controlled. They're not sure how much they're getting into at the moment with the need, because the ECF need was, as Andrea mentioned, was greater than they expected.
Okay.
Therefore, they've added this onto the E-Rate program, and they put the caps on there so it wouldn't completely drain the E-Rate funding right off the bat. They usually have
Okay.
a surplus, but they weren't sure if this would completely just swallow up the surplus or whether they would have some wiggle room. So they put caps on this at $15 per line per month for the actual service and $90 per item per MiFi device. So yeah, that's a very good question. So it's
Okay.
a limit per service line and a limit per item at $90 and service line $15 per month. So if you have 4 lines, that's 15 for each line per month. So you got $60 a month over the 12 months, and it adds up pretty quickly
Right.
that way.
Right. And then the other question I had, what do you normally recommend for the min and max speeds for the libraries to be bidding for?
Well, I believe last I knew the state requirement was at least 15 meg as far as getting state funding.
Okay.
And most of my libraries over the last few years, especially, when I first started over a decade ago, I had libraries that were getting 2.5 meg and all kinds of, which would now be ridiculous and almost impossible to use anything. The averages have now gone up to, I very rarely see a library with anything less than 20 meg, but most of them are now going 50 to 100. And I actually have quite a few little libraries, depending on the service provider, that are going as high as a gig. And the gig service really depends on the service provider and what kind of pricing they have for that service. In some areas, there's providers that have fairly reasonable 1 gig access, which is really good internet. But again, it depends on where you're at and what kind of pricing you get. And I should have mentioned, when we post our 470s, we're required to post for a range of services in any case. And we usually start with your current service level. So if you're getting 40 or 50 megs per month, we start our bidding process as window is 50 megs up to, and a good minimum we usually use for most areas is at least 500 meg. But in the last couple of years, we've moved it up to 1 or 2 meg, because sometimes you get a bid from a provider that's offering 1 or 2 meg services that's actually comparable with the what used to be 50 to 100 meg services. So you get way faster speeds at similar prices. And again, we have to post for a range anyway. If our range on our 470 is too small and we get bids that actually exceed that level that we actually want, we're not really supposed to select them. We'd have to post a new 470 and put a higher window on there. So we try to have a pretty big window in any case, just in case we get really favorable pricing on up to a gig or 2 gig. But I would say 100 to 500 is probably the average. But like I said, gigs are popping up left and right. Sorry to cut you off there.
Oh, that's all right. Is that something that you need the tech support's recommendation for? Do we need to do research and try to find out what the libraries have available to them, or is that something that you do?
That's another very good question. I can't actually act as a tech consultant, as a filing consultant. I'm not allowed to suggest particular brands of equipment or services. That really has to come from either a library tech consultant or somebody there at the library or director that has inside knowledge of what they actually need. And very good question as well, because sometimes when you're increasing internet access, especially a big jump to say a gig or 500 meg, depending on where you're at, sometimes you might need a new router or new access points or new switches or something to help spread that particular or faster level of service, depending on what you already have there at the. And again, a tech person that knows your setup or your system has way more information on that than I personally could or am allowed to actually give on that. So again, really good question.
Now, did I say anything about Linda's comment here about we were supposed to be at 1 gig, but definitely not that fast? Is that something that impacts this process if we agree to a contract and they're not providing the service that, or anywhere close to the service that they're saying they are?
That's another good question. In the early days, they used to do testing and we could argue service levels based on that. They really don't give us much wiggle room on that at this point. If a service provider is underperforming, really all we can do is wait to the next cycle. And either preferably if we don't have a long-term contract or like a new provider, sometimes it's better to go with a 1 year month-to-month kind of agreement just because you're not sure of their services. But even if it's a multi-year agreement, if you can let them know that their service is failing to meet expectations and we cannot stick with the service, again, we'd have to put it up for bid in the next cycle and try to find a better provider or switch service level to something more appropriate, because they kind of stick us on that. There is some wiggle room as far as like if you were going to switch service levels. If you're going to step up and it still fell into our bid window, I can argue to USAC that the current provider or the current service either is inaccessible, because sometimes we get bids for providers that can't actually provide service in that area. They have an expectation. Oh, we plan to have fiber set up by the time that the bid window or the service window started, but we didn't actually get it done. We can sometimes argue with USAC that we have to go back to a prior provider or a different service provider due to the fact that this provider failed. USAC is really difficult to push on that front, but if there's no other choice, we can definitely argue and try to get some sort of other approved funding. They won't give you more money if the service costs more, but usually you can apply the same funding or similar funding to a new provider or a different service level if you absolutely have to. Again, they're pretty strict on that, but sometimes you don't have any other choice. Like I said, a provider had the winning bid and claimed they were going to have fiber or whatever service or whatever level of service in your area, and they just failed to do so. They kind of overestimate their
Right.
ability to provide, or something happens that causes them not to be able to do it, or like I said, the service itself is just massively underwhelming. Sometimes we can argue that to USAC and reapply that same funding, not more funding, but the same already approved funding amount or less funding to a different provider if absolutely necessary.
Okay. And Linda, I just saw that you had a ticket out to them. So hopefully that'll address that. But, Linda, if this continues to be an issue, let me know. I believe I can actually contact the Kansas Department of Commerce, and we can make a complaint that way if they're the only provider, and they're saying that they're going to be at this level, especially if they're saying at a gig and you're far from that, then I think Kansas Broadband or the Kansas Department of Commerce would be interested in hearing that, because I know that the federal government has put a lot of money into trying to improve Kansas's speeds. And I'm going to share screen with you right now. Let's see. Let's share this one here. This here is the speeds in Kansas. So they're looking at internet availability for the state of Kansas, and so this is important. And we need to make sure, like right now, we got 2 counties that do not have any access at all to 1 gig. And then I believe Anderson County, it says that 46.9% of your county has access. So we have a variety in our region here as far as what's available. Most of you, or a good chunk, will have at least 100, but there's a few of you that will not. A lot of times the libraries and the school districts will have access to the best internet that's available in that county, as opposed to regular consumers, because a lot of times the schools and the libraries are in the business districts, or their emphasis in the planning for this by the county level and everything. So and they know that libraries are going to use internet, and they know that if they don't take care of us, they're not going to convince their consumers, the other consumers in the community, to get their internet if we're the example of what they can get. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing that, but I'll send this link out in case you guys are interested. This might be good information for you to talk to your boards, and also for the county planning commissions, so they know that we need to try to get better internet in your particular community, especially Elk and Chautauqua. I'm just very surprised about the limitations of what's available. I think if I remember right, even the 24, I think one of them was only 17%. So that's not speaking very well for what that county has access to. So, but the state of Kansas, with the DOC grant and the ADOPT grants that are coming out, there's a lot of money there. It looks like Linda just said that she ran a speed test, and it was actually at 41.3 download and 17.7. Yeah, that's not a gig. So,
Not even close.
Okay,
I do.
I apologize for breaking in on there, but I just wanted to let them know that this is something that the state of Kansas is taking very seriously.
That was excellent information. Ironically, I'm from Elk County, so I was well aware of that particular. I went to high school in Longton, so I'm very familiar with Elk County and Chautauqua counties.
Okay.
There was, I was going to mention one of the issues with some of the service providers' bids is a lot of times they do say things like a gig service, and sometimes there'll be fine print somewhere that says that it can be anywhere up to a gig. And it should be at least somewhere near that, or at least comparable to that, to call it a gig service. But there seems to be a lot of leeway with service providers giving misinformation. I get a lot of bids that for a couple of years, USAC required us to file fiber as a separate than regular internet access. And this is because they wanted to see where the fiber lines actually were. And a big part of this whole USAC E-rate program is to help extend quality internet service all across the nation. So again, like you were saying, using this funding to help, and that was one of the things, schools and libraries getting access to things like fiber meant their surrounding communities should also then gain access to things like fiber and high-end internet access. So that was a big initiative of this whole program in the first place, was to help spread that internet service, especially to the more rural areas. But a lot of the providers give kind of misleading information as to sometimes what they will call fiber is what I would personally call one-off fiber or fiber to cable, because you don't actually have a fiber line coming into the establishment. You actually have fiber line adjacent, and you're just getting a thread or basic broadband, which is off of their fiber line. So a lot of times what they call fiber, and we used to argue this as consultants, because especially when we had to file fiber as a completely separate service, if your bid said fiber, please let it be fiber, or have some kind of documentation or proof that this is fiber. But we learned quickly that service providers get a lot of leeway as far as what they can say as far as their service against what might actually be the truth, which is very hard to determine when you haven't actually worked with a provider, or you haven't tested your lines to see what your actual service is. So it is good to take these tests every once in a while to find out just exactly what kind of service you might be getting, because fiber might not be fiber, and a gig, as we've just seen, sometimes is nowhere near a gig. That was ridiculous.
I think, Linda, one other thing that I will do, the tech support team will make sure that you have the equipment that you really need in order to even be able to utilize the 1 gig. Cause that's something too. If you're supposed to get a 1 gig, and if we do not know that that is what you're supposed to get, and we haven't been, or we weren't involved in the process, we might not have known that you needed to go ahead and upgrade your equipment. So that is something. Okay, they're checking on for next week. Yeah, let me know. I'm assuming when you say tech support or tech services, you're talking about the provider, you're not talking about Dave or Jake. Is that correct? As we look at the screen to wait over. Okay, Twin Valley. Okay, so yeah, I'm hoping that the rest of you who are online, looks like we've lost 3. The rest of you are online. I hope that you guys realize that if you are having issues, let us know at the tech support, and we can go ahead and do some of the coordination with the providers to make sure that we got the equipment that you need, because category 2 stuff, we can go ahead and request that and make sure that we're good to go. So anything else, Ben?
Well, that's another good point, because as I mentioned earlier, if you don't have the right routers and access points and switches to push that particular level, because like I said, when you step up to a gig and you had a lower service, sometimes you do need to update your equipment as well, or your system might not be able to handle the increase. So that was a very, very good point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that might be part of what's slowing things down.
Okay. And Ben, she said that you filed for them to upgrade the 1G. If you ever do, if you could let me know or let us know if you are doing anything on their behalf for that, so that way we can be involved in that process too.
I can do that.
Especially since if they're trying to do that, we're probably going to have to try to get some of that funding for the equipment through the category 2. So that's a communication process between us. And again, I appreciate Linda, you've been very helpful in this. You get an extra penny. So,
That was helpful.
so.
And a little more information on the Cat 2. Again, anything that helps push the internet access. And this actually includes things like configuration and installation can be included with Cat 2. So if you're worried about, you have eligible equipment, but you're not sure what it might cost to have it installed or to get it configured, that can actually, especially if I know up front, and I do like to have that information up front. If I know that you need the installation and configuration and those things, we can put that on our 470 bidder request for the Cat 2 and try to include things like the installation, which cabling, drops, things like that can be included in that process. Because otherwise, if some of these things add up, and if you don't have them when you're trying to increase or add the equipment, those additional costs can come out of nowhere. So if we know the installation and configuration, the cabling and things like that, and we'll often need like an estimate of what kind of cabling we need, or if there's going to be a new drop or something like that, and we can include that on our RFP. We can try to include that in the funding as well and get that, the percentage covered by USAC, which helps a lot when these projects are, when you're trying to update your entire network and you're gonna have to put in new cable as well as your new routers and your battery backups and all that. So the more we know up front, the easier it is to file and the more we can cover as far as the Cat 2 needs.
Okay. Is there any questions among any of you? When you were offline, I talked to Teresa. I know Teresa I believe you guys have talked a little bit. But yeah, the battery backups, we're going to be pushing that. So Linda, again, thank you for that. Our goal is to get as many, battery backups, or if you've got one staff computer, then you get one battery backup. If you've got 5, public, then we get 5 public backups, and then try to rotate those on a regular basis. And they're not all that expensive, especially if we can do 3,600 a year without a bid. I believe Teresa has not used, or Moran hasn't used it for a while, but did you say they have the EPC account?
I believe they do, yes. I probably
Okay.
needs to be up. They should already have one in the system, yes.
Okay, if you, Teresa, if you could make sure to talk to me about that and just make sure, we need to make sure that you've got all the information that we're supposed to have, because that's a longer process and that might not be able to be done by the windows that they've got. So did anyone else have a question? I thought Andrea did.
I was just gonna ask how many battery backups we could get, if there was like a limit or something, but you kind of answered that. I guess we can get.
My understanding, it's based upon the funding that is given to you for category 2. And just to let you guys know, there is an actual amount
Yes.
for you guys, and I'm going to share the tool here. It's it's off of their site, and I think I sent something to everybody last year saying what your, let's see, where's there we go.
That's another good point. And again, on the battery backup, as long as it's for eligible equipment that helps push the internet, it is eligible. And also, I forgot to mention, licensing for any eligible equipment is also eligible for E-rate, because with certain products, the Meraki products, they need licensing, and the license has to be renewed every 3 to 5 years, depending on how long your license is. And again, if you let me know on that, if it's for eligible equipment such as access points and routers and switches and even firewalls, I can also apply for the licensing for the eligible Cat 2 equipment, and we can include that at the 70, 80%, whatever your refund percentage is as well. So for the battery backups and eligible licensing, as long as it's for eligible equipment, we can get licenses and battery backups. And again, there's no actual limit to how much you can request. As we were just mentioning, there is 5-year blocks. Oh, there you go. Nice. There are 5-year blocks. FY25 is the last year of the current 5-year block. So whatever funding you have remaining in there is eligible for this 1 year only. And then as of FY26, it's going to reset. And the funding percentages for Cat 2 are based on the square footage there at the library. And it should remain the same for the next window. So whatever's remaining in your budget that isn't spent this year is going basically to vanish. And it's going to repopulate for the following FY26 funding year. So this is the last year they just started doing this. This is the first 5-year chunk block funding they've tried. And it's just about to expire as of FY25 is the final year of the first ever 5-year funding block for Cat 2. So whatever funding isn't spent this year will reset for FY26. So if you have big needs, you can go ahead and get them for FY25, and then for FY26, you'll have a brand new Cat 2 budget for the next 5 years. Just ahead.
And this is one thing that that I have mentioned in user groups and other things or in the forums, we have not been utilizing our category 2. Like right now, one of our like Iola has 63,540. And still has 63,540 of eligible. So Brenda, don't tell Sharon that I called her out on this, okay? Since she's my raider. So but we also, all the small libraries, no matter what your size, $25,000 is the minimum for all of you. And then now some of the libraries on here are not in our system. There's not an easy way to limit it unless I go select them all. But we need, if nothing else, I want to make sure that we get $3,600 or at least enough for all the backups and for a new router, and try to get that all done for every library this year. But even if we hit 70% of that, I'll consider that as a very big successful mark for us. But we will be, if you hear from us, this is what we're trying to push. Because again, I think when I totaled all that up, it's over $1.5 million and that's a 5-year window so unless you guys all plan to make sure that you spend it this year, we spend all of $1.5 million and then we get a new $1.5 million next year. Maybe that's what the game plan was, but
basically, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Andrea say, oh yeah, that was definitely my plan. So Brenda, I see you're on here.
Darren, we have a new question.
Yes.
Jennifer wants to know if scanners can be included in category 2.
Is my understanding scanners cannot be, is that correct, Ben?
Yeah, and any of the end of the line equipment, monitors, computers, security systems, anything that is the recipient of the internet access is not eligible for the Cat 2 funding. Anything that helps push the service should be eligible. Anything that receives the service generally isn't.
And so some of the stuff that has been asked about, some of the other things have been asked about in the past, security camera system is not included in this, which unless there is a chance that some of the networking might be able to be included, but it would have to be because it's required to make the LAN actually work for the internet access to the points or to the computers that might be in that area. And then we could possibly connect the cameras to those new network drops. But there's some ways that we can look at it, but we understand that there's some limitations because we were talking about that for ILOs with their security system, whether or not we could get the network drops done for in the ceiling, and really they're going directly to the cameras, so we couldn't do that. So
there is a pilot program currently underway, and I believe there's something like 300 million being dedicated to this pilot program, which it's for cybersecurity primarily, not for just general security.
Okay.
But it's a cybersecurity pilot program where they're trying to delve into the needs for schools and libraries as far as their cybersecurity. And there's a $300 million limit to the pilot program and a lot of hoops to jump through just to be part of the pilot. But so far, they've already had something nearing 3,000 people request to be part of the pilot program. And in excess of $3.5 billion in funding requested for the 300 million they have available. So apparently the need is great. It doesn't cover general security, but they are looking into cybersecurity with this pilot
Okay.
program. So it might be a future aspect of E-rate. We're not sure yet, but again, we'll know more here in the following years. Apparently the need is great from what their numbers just showed us.
Well, that would actually be great if we can, if that happens, like with our websites, we did have to go to Security this year in order to go ahead and make sure that we had the right firewalls and everything. And that was a little bit extra money. So,
Yeah.
especially from a systems point of view, $5,000 would be that would be useful to get that back. But I guess we won't try to get on the trial program. So I have a feeling we will be denied. So
It
too
is,
slow.
it was supposed to just be for the 90% applicants, which is why I didn't push it with a lot. Most of my schools and libraries range from 50 to 60% to 80%. Very rarely do I see a 90% pop up, because it's usually saved mostly for the urban higher need entities. So we don't usually have 90%. And they said they were going to test the pilot with some other lower percentages as well, just to try to be as inclusive as possible. But apparently it is not only filled up, but it has overflowed to an extent that they couldn't have possibly imagined. So it's
Right.
pretty much impossible to get into that at this point. But yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and I mentioned on the firewalls, firewalls used to be ineligible, but they have made them eligible. But we're supposed to allocate out filtering, which is a major job of the firewall. And of course, with the E-rate program, you're supposed to be SEPA compliant, which most state libraries are supposed to be SEPA compliant anyway, as well as the schools. So that's generally just an easy thing to maintain. But that's a part of the funding initiative. But SEPA compliance requires filtering, of course, which for some reason, and I've never understood this, is not actually eligible through E-rate. So they won't pay for your filtering, but they require you to filter. So
Right.
that's another baffling aspect of E-rate that I've never been able to figure out. And hopefully they'll change one of these days. But I have filed for quite a few firewalls over especially the last 4 or 5 years. And most of them have been funded, if not fully funded, at least up to 70% of your eligible of that full price, they will deem as
Okay.
eligible. So your percentage will be based on the 70%. So if they say it's 70% eligible, then your 70 or 80% comes out of the 70% that they deem eligible. So generally
Okay.
firewalls and licensing can be included though.
I'll follow up with you and see what we have is a firewall that is at Northeast Kansas system, because that's where our websites are hosted. So I'll see if that actually is eligible. I think Sharon would be happy with me on that, wouldn't she, Brenda? If I could save her a little bit of money, and then she wouldn't mind if any of you guys tattletale on me calling her out on their 63,000. She might forgive me for that. So. Is there any other questions? We're getting ready to get to about an hour here.
I wanted to clarify. I know when you're talking the category 2, you are saying if it's under $3,600, there's no bid process.
Yes.
Is that total or like per, let's say we wanted to do battery backups and we wanted to do the MiFis and we wanted a new router. Is that 3,600 total amount? Or is that like the routers can't cost more than that, or the battery backups can't cost more than that? How does that work?
Another good question. It would be for the total sum of your combined Cat 2. And I believe the MiFis and MiFi devices are going to be filed as Cat 1. I'm not completely certain of that, but I believe they're actually not going to take it out of the Cat 2 budget. I believe that will be part of the lump sum budget. So it won't actually affect your Cat 2 budget, because it's going to be regular services. So I believe the way they're currently setting it up, that the MiFis as well as the MiFi devices should actually fall under Cat 1 from what I understand.
So like we already have, through the ECF, we have hotspots that we lend out. So that should take us through the end of 25, hopefully, if they don't take our money away from us. So then what we would be applying for now or soon would be for July of 25 through July of 26, right?
Yeah, through June 30th of 26. Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Okay.
Good questions.
Well, I'll have to, I'll get back with you, Ben, on that too, because I want to make sure that I understand what I need to be recommending to them. Or, well, it's category one, so well, you said that you can't really make any recommendations of whether or not they get it. They have to sort of request it for you, so we would have to do the request, or I would have to do the request for either David or Jake, and then we'd request to you, and then you would go ahead and do the or the bid application.
Yes,
Okay.
and tech consultants can definitely supply what we call equipment lists, which generally
Okay.
is recommendations for the school or library to what equipment they need. And again, if a library is uncertain as far as budget goes or what the bid pricing goes, after we do the 470, the 470 kind of just tests the water. So if the pricing is exorbitant or the budget just can't handle it, I will drop the 470. We're not going to charge you for filing. If you're not getting any funding, then there's not going to be no fee involved with it. So don't worry about that at all. It's just if it doesn't work out, or you can't afford it, or the library decides that they don't need all this new equipment, or it's just going to be too expensive for this year, you can also pick and choose to some degree, and we can actually request the bidder to limit or drop things off and get a new bid sheet and sign with that as well. So, or mark things out that we're not going to include. So
Now,
we can.
I'm
There's some
sorry.
wiggle room. Sorry.
That's all right. If we look at an EPC for the system, there's money there on the category two that's listed for us, but that's only, we can't, even though we're supporting these libraries and they're external to our, where our headquarters is, if they're not able to purchase, are we able to use some of that category two funding that we have? Or I don't quite understand what, because it's the same number as what is given to Iola, and that's just because we
Yeah.
share the building. How can we utilize that? And is there any way that I can help the libraries, if, especially the smaller libraries where 80% getting paid would be great, but $200 they don't have $200.
I'm afraid the way it's currently set up, that any application would have to be directly through the library entity receiving the equipment or the services, or like in Cat 2 equipment, receiving the equipment. So you can't actually file for another entity unless you're the parent entity and it's a branch library, which means it's
Okay.
directly filed through you or underneath you, which I do have a few library districts that file 3 or 4 libraries all filed together as one. They can basically share budgets and interchange a little bit, but as far as a system, as an overseeing the libraries underneath the system itself would not be able to purchase through the library system and still have it E-rate eligible anyway. Good question.
Could we request it to have in our, let's say, our supply closet, so when we need to address an issue out there that we've got spare routers until they're able to buy their own router?
That's another good question, but again, that's another area where USAC does not allow anything that's not going to go directly into use. They don't allow anything to be warehoused or stored, because if it's not going to be directly into use, you're not allowed to get E-rate funding for it. Another really good question, though.
I'm full of them today, so.
Yeah, I like it.
Or I'm full of something, so, okay. Any
I'm
other
told the
questions?
same thing regularly.
There you go. Any other questions? I know I'm looking here, we've got quite a few new librarians here, so I hope that they'll make sure that they'll talk to you, and I know I see Kevin, Emma, well, there's Lou, so we got quite a few that are new here. Teresa's not been here that long, so so I hope that you guys feel comfortable to communicate with them, and like that anonymous Andrea person said, Ben is very, very good to work with. So
yeah, even if you don't want to file for E-rate, you're just curious about it, or you have questions or concerns, you can contact me. I'll give you all the information about what you might be eligible for, what kind of budget you have, what you have that might be eligible or ineligible. If you have any questions about filing fees, and again, our fees are on a graduated system, and we try to keep it as small as possible, because especially with a lot of my libraries that I work with, budgets are a huge concern. And generally, most of them that file for less than $1,000 pay our minimum, which is $100 per year. And if you're getting more than $2,000 in funding, I think it's 12%. So if it's above 1,000, anything that's, we charge 12%. And if you get over $2,000, it drops to 9%. If you start getting into the $10,000 range, it drops even farther. And for some of my bosses work with huge school systems, and they pay 1 or 2%, but they do millions of dollars in E-rate, which is baffling to me. But I'm glad they deal with it, not myself. I like working with libraries personally.
If you need something for your bosses, make sure that you copy the chat. This is all We Love Ben part now. So well worth the money to work with Ben. We've been working with him for many years. Ben is great. So if you need anything to tell your bosses that you're doing a good job, you're getting
I
some
appreciate it.
attaboys. So okay, unless there's any other questions, I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Again, I appreciate that you attended today, and Ben, thanks a lot. Now you and I will know each other's face, and
Very true.
and we'll go ahead. I've got some questions for you later. I'll send that to you, and it looks. Hopefully, we can get Linda at least halfway to a gig. So. Okay, well, thank you again.
Thank you for putting this together. I enjoyed it. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye.